Are you getting a divorce after decades of marriage in Wisconsin? You know what worked for your friend's 5-year marriage won't work for your 25-year one. Most people focus on splitting assets 50-50, but that oversimplified approach could cost you your retirement. My name is Jeff Hughes, and I'm the lead attorney at Sterling Lawyers. We are a large, exclusively family law firm, and we see hundreds of cases and judges every single month, and that gives our clients an unfair advantage. In this video, I'll reveal how property division actually works in Wisconsin after a long-term marriage, and 3 critical financial steps to take, and I'll conclude with 7 costly mistakes that could decimate your future after the divorce. Now, we know that long-term marriage divorce rates have doubled since the 1990s. These divorces are more complex than shorter marriage ones. That's a fact. And there is a greater risk due to the age of the parties later in their careers and closer to retirement. So whether you're just considering divorce or you're already in the process, this video will help you protect your financial future under Wisconsin law. Now let's start with property division laws in Wisconsin. Wisconsin is what we call a community property state. So what this means is that judges start with an equal division of all assets and debts, 50-50. Add it all up and divide it by 2. That is by law the starting point. Now, that doesn't mean that it'll end that way, but that's the beginning point. So the starting point for judges is found in our law statute 767.61 if you want to look that up and read it. But what you'll see there is that the judges can deviate from an equal division of assets and debts, especially in a long-term marriage. They'll consider the length of the marriage. They'll look at the short marriages and the long marriages. That all goes into play here. They'll look at the contributions of both spouses to the marriage. That doesn't just mean the financial contributions. That could also mean contributions as a parent and as a homemaker. The courts will look at the age and the health status of both parties, and they'll look at each party's earning capacity going forward. So I pointed out earlier that Wisconsin is a community property state. I only did that so you have a label to put on it and you're not confused with what you may hear, in that most states are what's called an equitable division of property. The courts have much more authority in those cases to look at equity, to look at fairness when distributing assets and debts. Okay, so back to us here in Wisconsin. Now, there are 2 types of property. There's non-marital property and there's marital property. Non-marital property is not divisible in a divorce. So like, what's in that? What is considered non-marital property? Well, the law defines 2 areas: property that is gifted and property that is inherited. Now, the party asking for these assets to be excluded, the burden of proof is typically on that party. Your job, if that's you asking for it, is to prove that these assets were inherited or they were gifted. And a lot of times you got to show that you kept them separate and that you can trace back the receipt of those gifts through documentation. That burden is on the party asking. Now, the other property, what's the other property? Well, the other property would be considered marital assets. That's where the court starts with a 50-50 division proposition. That's everything else. That's the house or houses, cars, debt, retirement, pensions, 401ks, businesses, household goods. Any other thing of value is considered a marital asset to be divided, as well as debt. All debt that the parties have is considered marital until the court says otherwise upon division. Now, also the parties are going to be required to either agree on the value of each of these assets, or they're going to be called upon to get a valuation, an appraisal if need be. Everything can be valued. Now, it may not be valued perfectly, but it's valued by today's market rates. That would also include household items, collections. Now, collections can be very tricky because they can be highly valuable to someone and worth nothing to someone else. So that's something that could cause conflict when it comes to valuation, and you may need an outside expert to decide or to render an opinion as to the valuation of those particular assets. They can be very difficult to value, as can businesses. Businesses can be valued with a whole lot of different methodologies and can lead to much different results depending on which methodology is applied. And sometimes businesses, frankly, are just disguised jobs, meaning they may be a business technically, but they're really not worth anything. Okay, so in summary, all assets can fall into two categories: marital or non-marital. And if it's marital, you need to get a value for each of those so you can put a number to those. Okay, now let's move to the 3 critical financial steps that everyone needs to take in a long-term marriage especially. One is document everything. You need to come up with documentation for everything that you have, assets and debts. Number 2 is do proper healthcare planning. Think that part of it through. That is a big piece of divorcing with a good agreement that will protect you in the future. And step 3 is retirement recalibration, taking a fresh look at all of the retirement accounts and making the right decision for your future for how those are going to be addressed in your divorce. So let's start with the documentation. What I mean by that is gather statements from every single one of your accounts, even the small accounts. That includes all retirement accounts and pensions. Now, pensions can be very tricky to value. Not as easy to value a pension as it would be, for example, an IRA or a 401k, where you can simply just look at the statement and apply the formula to get the right valuation for that. You're also going to need to document all of your valuable personal property, including jewelry. Jewelry can be tricky, and a lot of times that could be a big area for conflict as to the right valuation, because what we paid for it at the jewelry store is not what it's worth the day we walk out of it from the jewelry store. And that can be a point of conflict in a divorce when it comes to property division. You may need to get professional appraisals for all significant assets. Now, this isn't just about gathering all the paperwork. That's onerous, it takes time. It's also about creating a clear financial picture of your life. Now let's shift gears over to healthcare planning. This becomes particularly critical in long-term divorce cases. So review your current coverage. Know what you have now. Understand what your COBRA rights are in Wisconsin. You also may need to explore healthcare marketplace options and take a look at long-term care insurance. So if you've been covered under your spouse's insurance for the past number of years, you need to understand your options. The first one is that upon divorce, you have the right to get COBRA coverage. That's temporary. That means you will stay on your spouse's plan, but it's temporary, it's time-bound, and it can be quite expensive because you're essentially paying what the employer of your spouse has been paying. That's basically how that works, plus the employee side of the expense. So it's both the employer and the employee side, and it's usually 18 months, but that changes, that could vary. Now in Wisconsin, you do have the right to explore the healthcare marketplace, where you can possibly look at getting long-term healthcare insurance there, especially if you're approaching retirement age. Okay, let's talk about retirement accounts, recalibrating retirement accounts. Now this has very unique challenges associated with it. So you're going to need to look at, perhaps evaluate the Social Security benefits if you've been married over 10 years, review pension division requirements, what that is going to be like. Consider doing a quadro, a qualified domestic relations order for retirement accounts. That's a mechanism that can divide up a 401k, can split it, can carve a chunk out of it. Same thing for an IRA, same thing there. And you may need to assess even delaying retirement, unfortunately, after you take a look at all of these assets together and plan out your future. Now, with respect to the Social Security, if you've been married over 10 years, you may be eligible to receive the greater of your benefits or your spouse's benefits. But this could significantly impact your retirement planning. So look this up and understand how it applies to you in your case. Pensions, retirement accounts, if your spouse has one or you have one, they can be divided at the time of divorce using that quadro methodology that I mentioned earlier. It's a great way to split up retirement accounts without triggering unnecessary taxes or penalties. Okay, now let's move to building your professional support team. So if you're concluding a long-term marriage, it is imperative that you build the right professional support team for yourself. And yes, it does start with securing the services of an experienced divorce lawyer. I have seen very few cases where a party would not be well served to get a lawyer to, if nothing else, consult with them as they look at their overall plan for division of assets and look into their future. Most people would be just foolish not to do this. I beg people to do it. The consequences are so severe if they don't. Okay, that's the first one. The second one is consult with a qualified financial planner. Now, there are certified divorce financial analysts out there. There's not a lot of them, but those folks are excellent at these things. If you can find one of those, they can help you understand what the long-term implications are for you personally in dividing up the retirement accounts and the assets. And that could completely alter how you want to go about doing the settlement in your particular case. If not one of those folks, then a really good local, and I stress local, financial planner, someone that you have access to that you can work with both during the divorce process as a part of the negotiations and certainly afterwards to help you think through your retirement plan and managing your financial future. You may also need to consult with a tax professional to help you identify any potential tax pitfalls or opportunities that you may have as you go through and divide up these assets. And lastly, do not overlook the potential need for a mental health professional. I can't imagine going through a divorce after a long-term marriage. That is really, really difficult. I've seen clients really in a lot of pain. And in almost every case, they were well served to talk to someone that can help them process all of the emotions, that helps them make better decisions for themselves financially as they're going through a divorce. Okay, let me conclude with avoiding the 7 costly mistakes that can impact your financial future for years to come. The first is the house trap. Do not keep the house without thoroughly running the numbers and understanding how it will impact you financially into the future. Make sure you consider maintenance costs, taxes, future repairs, all of that sort of stuff. Factor in any potential downsizing needs that you may have. Now, I get the family home can be so emotional, especially if you've raised children there, but it is not worth compromising your future to hang on to that home. It is important, I get that, but your future and your financial stability and being able to live without unnecessary stress is more important. You do not want to be house rich and cash poor and be later forced into a situation where you have to sell the house and be in a much worse position than if you were to just take care of that now on the front end. The second costly mistake is hidden and overlooked assets. Now, you would be surprised how often this happens. People can lose track of assets, old bank accounts, even old retirement accounts, even assets that are put in the safety deposit box at a bank, all of that I have seen come back to court later whenever parties discovered it later, and it's much more difficult to deal with then. So to find these, look at your past tax returns. Go back years, 5+ years if you have to see if you see anything that does not show up today and understand what happened with that. Check for any unusual business expenses. If you have a business, look at the business records going back years and see if you see anything that looks odd or out of place. Another one is cryptocurrency. This stuff can be very easy to hide. So look around at every possible place where you can find this and look for money transfers that happened in the past years into crypto wallets. It's a place where assets can be easily hidden. They can be quite valuable as well. And look at all of your assets and consider, were any of them gifted? Were any of them inherited? And that's part of it as well. That can be overlooked, and you can requalify or you can reclassify an asset if it was inherited or gifted. So the third costly mistake is making a decision purely based on emotion. Now, this is a very difficult time that you're going through. It is hard, it is painful, and we can be so tempted to make rash or emotional decisions, or decisions out of guilt, or decisions out of anger. I encourage you not to do that and think through where life is at for you, where inflation is going, what your future expenses may be, and consider all of the tax implications of your asset division. Whether it's guilt pushing you to give up too much, or it's anger driving you to fight for things that you don't really need, emotional decision-making can have long-lasting and severe consequences. A fourth costly mistake is undervaluing assets, and this especially shows up with businesses or assets that don't have an easy way to evaluate them. So think through all of your assets, make sure you have the right valuation attached to them, get a second opinion if you need to. Look online for other assets that are similar, that are being offered for sale, or that were sold. Okay, a fifth costly mistake is ignoring tax implications. Now, when doing this, certainly consult with a tax professional for all of your assets. Have them look over and give you an opinion to think through what may be the hidden tax consequences of me retaining this assets or me giving up this assets, and watch for long-term capital gains versus short-term capital gains. Watch for what your cost basis may be in those assets. Understand all of that and what your future tax bill may look like if you hold on to that particular asset. Okay, the sixth costly mistake is misunderstanding asset liquidity. Businesses are a big one. They're really hard to sell. They can take a long time, and the deals don't always go through. In fact, most businesses offered for sale are never sold. That's the reality of businesses. Commercial real estate can also be difficult to turn into liquid cash. They could take months and quarters to sell that, and you may not get what you think it's worth. Other assets like art collections, jewelry, all of that can be very hard to liquefy, to turn into cash. So make sure you apply the appropriate discount to those things that are really hard to turn into liquid cash that you can use and you can spend to support yourself. Okay, the seventh and last costly mistake to avoid is failing to consider alimony or maintenance alternatives. It would be really wise for you to consult with a lawyer if you feel like there's an opportunity for you to offset assets for maintenance. Maybe it's wise for you in your case to give up maintenance, in return get more assets that are fixed, that are hard, that you know you have access to, especially if you're considering remarrying where you would lose maintenance anyway. Now, as we wrap up, remember this: ending a long-term marriage in Wisconsin doesn't mean ending your financial security. It's about reorganizing your resources to support the next chapter in your life. So take time to gather the documents, build your professional team, and think long-term in your negotiations, not emotionally as you go through that. And most importantly, protect your rights while staying open to fair resolutions, fair negotiated settlements. To learn more about protecting your financial future in Wisconsin, I highly recommend watching this video, How Our Retirement Accounts Split During a Divorce. This is where we dive deeper into protecting your retirement savings. So just click this video on your screen now, and thanks for watching.